So, hi folks. My talk today is air gap. It's not just for air gap anymore. And I'm going to start this with the story. If you know me, you know everything has a story. But it's a story of a conversation I had doing a POV with one of our customers. And we had sort of gone through the whole POV and we were sort of wrapping up and getting to the point where we thought, that what we had was going to be a good beta for their customers. And I said, hey, should we put together an air gap build? And the person I was working with said, I don't think we're going to need air gap for a long time. And I let it sit there, but what was gnawing at me is this thought of you're going to need it sooner than you think. And I was, you know, sort of thinking about that and saying, why did we have this disconnect? And let's start exploring that by thinking about what is an air gap. So I've been around a while. I get pedantic about some things, and this one definitely brings out my inner cranky gray beard. And when I think air gap, I think of a scenario like this, right? We've got networks that are completely separate from each other. You've got maybe multiple networks that are, or network segments that are exposed to the internet. These are, where a lot of your people are going to be doing their day-to-day work. And then you've got networks that are, physically segregated, right? That's the reason we call it an air gap. You have to travel through the air rather than, through the ether on optic cable to get between the two networks. Now, like air could just be the space moving from, one computer to another in the same room, or, in some cases you could have to go to, specialized facilities to get into the air gap network, or even to a remote place, to where the network runs. So I get a little cranky about what constitutes an air gap, and I think this is what led to that gap in conversation. The person that I was talking to was also thinking about this when I said, should we do an air gap build? And they were thinking, no, that's something we're not going to need for a long time. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, I think you're going to need it for your first or second customer. So that led me, after another little bit of a rant to a couple of colleagues, to finally come to the conclusion that air gap is not just for air gap anymore. Um, when you think about what replicated can do for air gap to networks, we really um, provide a solution for a lot of different use cases that can have different levels of segmentation, different levels of connectivity, et cetera. And, you know, I don't actually remember if it was my thought or the thought of one of the people that I ranted to about this, that this would be a great talk for Replicon. And so here we are with that talk. So let's first think about, in addition to what Grant just shared with us around, the installation instructions that we provide for the scenario of installing Helm charts in for some version of something that I will use my air quotes to say air gap, what we could call air gap. We've been building air gap bundles for installations with COTS and curl for a very, very long time. Um, they are, and in doing that, we've run into lots of scenarios around, how can we interpolate your Helm charts and your manifest to understand what images we need to include? That's where, Grant referenced the builder config in the Helm chart kind, right? That we needed that because we realized that sometimes you need to set certain values to make certain images visible to the air gap builder. Grant referenced additional images, right? We need to have that additional images field in order to specify the images that we couldn't possibly interpolate, right? The ones that are referenced in your code, for example, if you use the operator model pattern, excuse me, for something that you install, or things like image signatures and SBOMs that you may want to include in your air gap bundle and ROCI images, but aren't obvious referenced at all, really, in your Helm charts and your templates. So we've been building these air gap bundles for a long time. And so there's a lot of, you know, information we've gathered to both support you in specifying what all the images are and to make sure that you don't have to do a lot of work to specify those images. And that's what Grant's team, took and used to drive these install instructions. So that they're, you know, we ended up with a really robust set of instructions there and the images that you needed. And of course, we could take that same bundle and we put it in the tarball that you get with the embedded cluster with its installer and your customer's license. And this is another way that we really effectively support air gap installs with the embedded cluster. So I'm going to take sort of each of these techniques and I'm going to take some of the use cases and conversations that might come up, and I'm going to talk a bit about how they work and how you might apply them. So let's look first at sort of basic situations, right? There's network egress controls on the cluster that you're running in, right? So really simply, customer comes to you and says, we have staging hosts and production hosts, and they can't access the internet. Do you have an internal registry? First thing you should ask them, right? Because you're going to go different directions if they don't have an internal registry. So if our customer says, yes, we do, or your customer says, yes, we do, cool, you got them, right? So let's look at the challenge we have here. Your customer, their network does not allow any access to outside resources on the internet. So that's pretty easy, right? We treat this network as an air gap network. We can install with either the Helm chart or the embedded cluster. And that's going to bring all of the image access into that same network segment. If we are using the embedded cluster, in fact, in addition to bringing it into the same network segment, we're actually going to just bring it entirely into the cluster. So it's just in the cluster network and nothing else. So, let me show you, Grant showed you some screenshots in the previous session. Let me show you a little bit, sort of about what this is going to look like for me, right? I've got my customer here named Giglo. Grant put a call out to this. I love that we now have this better management here for the customer password, and I understand we'll hear from Ember a little bit later how this is going to get even better as we move towards the enterprise portal. But if I come over and I log in, I've already logged in as Giglo. I can see, all those versions based on the channel that I'm on. I see my login credentials my for the registry, again, branded there, shortrib.io. That will be your domain, should always be your domain. If you have not configured your custom domains, hey, grab our support team. Like, we would love to help you do that. We have commands here for pulling and tagging images that are easily copy pastable. Especially if I put in here the registry that I want the destination to be. It can also include, so this is a Harbor registry. So Harbor has this notion of, um, Harbor has this notion of projects that becomes part of the URL path. So I drop that in there. That's going to make my copy paste here really clean. I am going to the little trick on you here and only grab these first four because I have my image signature in there. And I meant to show the earlier version that doesn't have the signature, so I could easily do the copy paste. But the Docker command gets a little iffy with pulling and pushing and tagging the image signature. So I can pull all of these images down to my local machine here. Next step, I'm going to tag them. And my copy paste here is going to show exactly where they need to go, right? registry.shortrib.dev /slacker news / blah, blah, blah. Each of these, will pull down. It's got my my application image. It's got the image for the replicated SDK, and it's got my supporting services, in this case, Nginx and Postgres. And then I tag them, and then I push them over to my registry. Some of these, at least, are probably going to be pretty fast because I've pushed them before. As I go over to Harbor here, I've got this Slacker News project, and you can see each of my images is up in that registry. Um, Pretty easy. I follow the instructions. Now they're in the registry that can be accessed from this network segment that has those egress controls. So um, next, we're going to have, sort of a variation on this where we have some registry access policies. So um, oftentimes you're going to hear something like this. You might have a dependency like I do in Slacker News, where a couple of my images, three of them, in fact, out of the four, are coming from, in fact, all four of them are coming from one of these registries they might not allow access to. Slacker News itself is coming from the GitHub container registry. The other two are coming from Docker Hub. So customer tells you they don't allow access, probably either because they maintain a whitelist or a blacklist of registries. Um, Honestly, your first solution is not an air gap solution, right? If you are using the proxy registry, it is not just for your images. It can apply to images you are dependent upon from anywhere else. Um, Take the proxy registry, put your own host name on it, make sure you get that whitelisted, or at least make sure it's not on the blacklist, and you have solved this problem. Um, However, the whitelist or blacklist could be more restrictive, and that might not be the best approach. Um, and you can take those same set of install instructions and you can do sort of the same thing we did in that previous case. And you can take the images, you can copy them over um, into your the customer can copy them over into their registry, or they might use a feature like Grant referenced before, where you've got a pull through. So I've got what they call it a proxy cache in Harbor World. Artifactory supports this as well, where I've got a um, basically I'm putting a proxy in front of the proxy. I can click this guy. I can get a pull command here for Docker. This would be the same thing that was going on within my cluster. I don't know why that didn't copy for me. Um, it should come up in my history. Of course, it's not coming up. I use nerdy control. That's why. Um, I can pull that through. It's coming through there. It's still coming from one of those registries, but it's coming through my local proxy and putting any sorts of scans on it that I might want. Okay. That whitelist could get really narrow um, and just be one registry, right? You can only pull all the images from our enterprise registry. I gotcha. We can do this. We can use the same types of things we're doing here. And maybe not only that, but maybe all those images need to be signed, with a co-signed signature, so that they can be validated that they're coming from the right place. So let's take a look at this scenario, right? Your customer requires all the images come from the enterprise registry. It's been blessed. They have certain policies in place there. They want to make sure images are signed. They maybe want to make sure they all get scanned inside that registry, right? Registries a lot more than just a container for your container images now, right? They do scanning. They can generate SBOMs. They can have their own policies that allow you not to pull images that have certain severities of CVEs. Um, and any of our air gap solutions will work for this scenario. Um, but given the amount of sort of an opinionated, statements I've made there about the things that they're going to have policy enforced in their registry, they're going to have policies about images being signed, et cetera. Most likely, this customer is going to be doing a Helm install. So our Helm install instructions can help us with that. Let's pop over to our Harbor registry again and notice that I have in Harbor, under my administrative capabilities, I can set up external registries. That's how we did the pull through. It was using this Slacker News images. I could even grab charts that same way, either through that proxy cache, or I can do replication. So if I look at this replication here and I look at the details of it, I can have a pull-based replication that runs periodically, as well as I could run it manually if I wanted to. Um, I can change, different details. Any different registry is going to do different things. But notice here, I'm including the image signature that I need because it's required that my image be signed. That's just another tag, right? So I add into sort of the tags that I match here. I make sure I include the signatures. I pop back over to my project that has the replication here. You can see I have Slacker News Web, and it shows that it's been signed with cosign. I can see the signature, and I can validate, pull that from this registry now, validate that in a policy in cluster, for example. And again, so I can start to comply with those policies that my customer put forward with me. Again, just all from this same set of instructions, right? This login information that I got. And then as I set up my replications, I can set up my replications based on the images that I see here. Now, I cheated a little bit here, or maybe I was lazy a little bit here. I only put Slacker News Web in here. I didn't put the ones that are that I'm dependent upon for my dependency charts. In a real scenario, your customer is going to want to set those up as well, of course, because they're going to need all this stuff to come from, to come from their own enterprise registry. So that's a good way to help support the enterprise registry. The next scenario, and this is maybe where the old school folks like me, and I noticed Ben in the chat, start to think, wait, that's not an air gap, right? We have virtually air gap networks or virtually segregated networks, right? Customer says, hey, our network is really segmented out. We got a lot of different segments. We limit ingress and egress between them all. But then there's a wrinkle. You ask them if they have a container registry in the segment they want to install to, and they say no. We're okay. No problem here. We've got segregated networks and no registry. This is a perfect use case for the embedded cluster. The air gap capabilities address the segmentation in the same way as they have for other things that we've done. And then the fact that it has an integrated image registry, that provides the registry that your cluster needs. So I jump back over here. I'm going to pop over to my Bastion host that sits between the segment that I have virtually air gapped. Basically, I got a bunch of VLANs with rules as to what traffic can go back and forth. I actually do let this segment access my registry, but let's pretend I don't. I've done an air gap install with the embedded cluster here already. You can see I've got a port forward to that built-in registry service here, just so that I didn't have to run this in cluster. And sure enough, if I list using Crane the images that are there for Slacker News Web, the images that are there for Nginx, the images for Postgres, the replicated SDK, you can see all of these things are in my in-cluster registry. I'm running in my air-gapped segment or virtually air-gapped segment, and I don't have to think about a registry at all. I've got the registry built in, and it's being used here for, so I don't need any additional infrastructure. So that's how we work with the scenario where networks are segregated out and the segment that we have to install into doesn't have a registry of its own. Doesn't even have to have a cluster of its own because we're using the embedded cluster. Lastly, we have the traditional air gap networks. So customer says, hey, our network's air gapped. Great, cool, I'm confident, I got you. Customer wants to make sure. They say, hey, people toss that word around a lot. I want you to be clear. This is a true air gap, right? I'm a hospital. I'm a utility company. I'm a have some industrial automation. I'm the Ministry or Department of Defense, depending on what country you're in. This is a true need to get artifacts, need to put them on media, need to move them from point A to point B. We gotcha, right? This is what we built this stuff for originally. I am referencing here, I mean, basically any of these solutions is designed for this scenario. The primary ones that I'm referencing here, just based on my experience with what customers tend to like most, are using the Helm install instructions and using the embedded cluster. That's going to be based on sort of their maturity, what's available for infrastructure inside that air gap, et cetera. If they can get you VMs faster than they can get you Kubernetes, or if they're more confident in their team's ability to install and maintain on VMs and Kubernetes, by all means, use embedded cluster. If they are super opinionated and they've got clusters there, and then, give them a Helm chart, support them in making that work. So again, there's no, if I drop here back into my instructions, there's no like, here's my Helm air gap bundle, like there might be if I do a download for embedded cluster, and that air gap bundle is right there in that tarball, or even if I did traditional curl or COTS and I had that .air gap file that I could download and the other components that I might need that I, like the COTS plugin that I could burn to media and move back and forth. But I have the names here of all the things I need to include in whatever artifact I move from network to network. So I can run Docker save. I'm logged. Okay, let's try that again. Huh, something must be going on with my pull here. I thought I already did the pull, but let's try it again. I pull them down. I save them out to the bundle file. It's just a tarball. I'm just naming it bundle because uh, makes sense for me to do it that way. Let me try this one more time. Well, first let's run that save. I gotta have a typo in there that I'm not seeing. Um, let's see. Reference does not exist. Ah, it's that first one. My last time I ran this was with an older release, 16 build 15. Wouldn't be a demo if there wasn't a mistake to catch. All right. Anyway, I save them and then I can take that tarball. I should already still have that here from last time. I do just to hope, just how Docker saves it. I can clear out I'm going to pretend that I went to the other side by pruning this out so that it doesn't have any images in it. I've gone to the other side of the air gap now. I burned that onto media. I brought the media into a room with no windows. I've installed it into a workstation that's on their side. It's got a clean, no images Docker daemon in it. Sure enough, I run Docker load. I'm now loading them up there, up into the Docker daemon here. Once they're up there, I can go through these same steps. I can tag them for the new registry here, right? Secret registry short rib dot whatever. I guess I might call it .net. And but I can even I purposely do the move before I do the tag because sometimes people don't want even to talk about the host names that are inside the air gap on the publicly accessible network. So I do the move first, then I do my tagging. And then I can push those into that registry that I have on the other side of the air gap. So I hope, with this look at a handful of use cases where the replicated air gap functionality has been useful for me. I hope I've been able to convince all of you that air gap, it's not just for air gap anymore.